Welcome to today's Global Connections program. I'm Bill Miller. What is the American-Pakistan Foundation doing to promote stronger ties between the people in the United States and the people in Pakistan? What role is there for the diasporas to help spread the message and to lend their resources to deal with many of the problems that are confronting people in these two countries? My guest today is going to bring us up to date on these important issues. My guest today is Mr. Riaz Siddiqi. Mr. Riaz Siddiqi is one of the founders of the Denham Capital Management, LP. Mr. Siddiqi is also the chair of the board of directors of the American-Pakistan Foundation. Mr. Riaz Siddiqi, welcome to today's Global Connections program.
My pleasure, Bill. Pleasure to meet you.
Same here. I'm delighted you're with me today. Let's get right into the American-Pakistan Foundation. When was it formed? Why was it formed?
So the genesis of the foundation is 2009. And if you remember, there was a famous bill, the Kerry-Lugar bill, that was passed. And the objective of that bill was
This was John Kerry, Richard Lugar in the United States Senate. Okay.
Exactly. And the objective was to give Pakistan about $7.5 billion of aid over a period of time. And there was a military component to it, but there was also a civilian component to it. Mm-hmm. And at that time, with the encouragement of Mrs. Clinton, the late Ambassador Holbrooke, and Secretary Powell, and a few others, there was encouragement to the Pakistani American community to form call it a transparent, credible supply chain of development dollars going from the U.S. to Pakistan. So that was the original intent in 2009. Over that period of time, from 2009 to now, it has really shifted in its focus. And I think where we are today is sort of the lasting value proposition, and I hope we can get into it. The lasting value proposition is, the general subject is the role of diaspora populations in two countries. Diaspora populations, by definition, come from the country of origin, and they establish a home in the host country. And then they have children. And their children have a very special persona in that they are not born in the country of origin and yet have sort of generational connectivity back to their country. So that's the general framework. Now, the foundation, the way it works right now, its focus is to ensure that the Pakistani American diaspora is fully immersed in the ethos of the United States. It's understanding its history, it's understanding its values, and is about as American as every other American. So that's first and foremost, that's the objective. And from that position of strength as a community, then to participate in collaborative progress in its host country, which is Pakistan. So that's the second thing. Now, it is our wish, hope, aspiration that if we can be great ambassadors of Pakistan in the U.S. and of the U.S. in Pakistan, you generally create bridges of goodwill between the population of two nations. So that's it's a mouthful, but that's where we are today. That's what the objective is.
I see. And our viewers can go to your website at americanpakistan.org and get more information about your program.
Absolutely, americanpakistan.org.
Right. And we were talking about diasporas. We see the Haitian diaspora. We see diasporas from countries all around the world in the United States and vice versa too. How do you mobilize? Well, first off, how large is do you have a head count of the Pakistani diaspora?
Nobody has it exactly down to a science, but the estimates range from 600 to 800,000 in the U.S. So call it sub-million people in the U.S. And in terms of total diaspora of Pakistan, it may be as much as 8 to 10 million Pakistanis living outside of the boundaries of Pakistan.
And Pakistan is first off, in a very dangerous area of the world, but it is a critical player. It's a very important country in that area, especially since it abuts Afghanistan and it's involved with the regional negotiations and that type of thing.
True.
But how do you explain that to Americans when they say what Pakistan is about?
Yeah, well, that's a great question, because like any other people. Pakistan and Pakistanis are the result of centuries and centuries of history. And there is a very rich tradition of music. You've probably heard about the tradition of Sufis, and there's a lot of tradition of arts. And then, of course, we come to modern day times, and there are tensions with countries around Pakistan, as well as alliances with countries around Pakistan. So when I'm called upon to speak about Pakistan, I try as much as possible to be an ambassador of the history and traditions of Pakistan in its entirety, so that the sort of the monolithic view that is traditionally received by people on traditional media or social media these days, I can do my part in dispensing with those monolithic views and creating a more rich and a more accurate tapestry of what Pakistan and Pakistanis are all about. I will tell you that I grew up I was born in the 50s and grew up when in the 60s. There was a very rich tradition of Westerners coming down from the West, Europe, America, through Iran, Afghanistan, into Pakistan, and people would open up their houses to them. They would stay for days on end as guests, and then they would make their way to Kathmandu and all this. This was the day and age of the Beatles and, the beatnik times. And they were very celebrated as guests. So that is also Pakistan. What you hear today about regional tensions and tensions among cultures, that's also Pakistan. But we do ourselves collectively a disservice if we paint a people by a single attribute or a couple of attributes versus trying to find, what their totality is all about. And then what I try to do is to do my little share to paint the total picture, and that's why there's the need for foundations like the American Pakistan Foundation, who can tell the richer narrative, the more complete narrative than individuals can.
And of course, one way to do that is through the education system. Is your foundation involved in any type of educational activities in Pakistan, perhaps?
Right.
Maybe introducing new, methods in teaching or something like that, or involved in working with teachers, students, developing schools, or are you involved in the educational system?
Yeah, absolutely. So to date, since our inception, we have facilitated almost $8 million of capital going to Pakistan, development capital going to Pakistan, affecting about 45,000 lives in a variety of ways. And part of that has been a focus on education. But now where we're headed is, again, going back to the role of the diaspora, in the US, as you know, we are questioning our basic model of education. I don't know if you read Sal Khan's book, The Open World Schoolhouse. I mean, he writes about the fact that we have a Prussian model of education from 300 years ago. Life's moved on, we haven't, right? And so actually there's a Pakistani American, Babar Habib, who is running a school here in Manhattan, where you and I are situated right now, which is modeled after that concept, where it's an open school environment. There are no classroom walls. Children collaborate on the basis of ability and passion for a subject. Okay, so there are numerous such new models and experimentation taking place, some technology enabled and some alternative models of education. And it is our objective to take these alternative models and technology-based solutions and then make them available to all available distribution channels for this kind of content in Pakistan. Because right now there are NGOs. NGOs collectively are educating less than 1 million kids, but they're doing their share. There are government schools, and if you've been reading The Economist, you know that we have challenges in Pakistan. There's about 22 million kids out of school. And even those that are in school are not necessarily getting the right, schooling because of lack of teacher training. So there are lots of challenges. And the advantages of being in an emerging economy are you don't have to learn all the mistakes of the past, so to speak. I mean, you remember there's a famous adage that cell phone penetrations in areas that never had landlines are much greater than areas where you had landlines. So So the objective is to take the experiments in alternative models and also in technology over to Pakistan, and that way make a significant dent in this population, underserved population of 22, 23 million underserved kids.
Very true. And as you mentioned, that is, we use that cell phone analogy because you can leapfrog with technology. You don't,
Indeed.
You don't have to put up the telephone poles and do all the labor-intensive work and have all the equipment and that type of thing. You go cellular.
Indeed.
Whatever. You were talking about that article in The Economist, and that was in about 2 months ago, I believe.
Couple
something
months ago,
like
yeah.
that. Yes. And
Very
it
well
was
written.
Very well, a major article. And they were talking about the challenges to the Pakistani educational system. Is there one model that's really, you said, making a dent, one that's really changing how they provide information, how they educate the children, how they educate the teachers? Is there something totally different that they're doing today?
Well, so I don't think that there's one model. We should always understand that education is a legacy activity just like anything else. Every society has some educational resources and ipso facto some educational infrastructure. And for somebody to come and sort of say, we're going to start from ground zero, it's not going to work. And most likely it's not even the right thing to do. I think you have to do incremental work in areas. So I'll give you an example. There are thousands of schools that have cropped up in streets, gullies, what you call them in Pakistan in Urdu. Thousands of private schools have cropped up because the hunger for education in Pakistan is so great that parents would rather send their kids to school than to have the third meal or the second meal. Okay, so people have considered that to be a commercial opportunity and started schools. But if you look at the quality of teacher training in those schools and the content, it's not up to par, neither one of them. So there's a company by the name of Knowledge Platform out of, it's a Pakistani gentleman out of Singapore who has come up with a technology-enabled solution where using a laptop and a projector and a clicking device, you can improve the effectiveness of teacher transmittal of information by orders of magnitude, and you can reach kids at the rate of, his aspirational goal is $1 per student per month of training. So that, imagine this, a pre-existing distribution channel where there are thousands of schools already, you just make them much more effective. That's at least one of the more potent methods for improving the effectiveness of delivery of education in the portfolio of things we'll do. There's another gentleman who's a friend of mine. He's also a Pakistani American. He has actually quit his job. He's a senior executive with a hotel chain, quit his job, and they're experimenting with gamification as a pedagogical device. So they have experimented, they've gone out and give tablets to young kids on the streets, literally, homeless kids, and come back in 3 months, those kids have learned to read, write, and do arithmetic by themselves. Revolutionary technology. So I think the answer to your question is going to be there's no one method. I think there's a lot of methods that will be needed because the challenge is quite vast.
Well, you're watching Global Connections Television, which is a privately funded, independently produced program. The opinions expressed on Global Connections are solely those of the moderator and his guest. We'd invite our viewers to go to our website at www.globalconnectionstelevision.com to view previous programs. Also, if you're involved with any type of a PBS or community access television station, or perhaps an educational institution that has an intra-campus television hookup, or you just have a website and you'd like to share our programs, please feel free to do so. Global Connections Television is provided at no cost as a public service to help us better understand international issues and how they impact our lives. Today we're taking a look at a very interesting foundation that's promoting a better understanding between Americans and Pakistanis and looking at what's being done in the area of education improvement and many other areas. My guest today is Mr. Riaz Siddiqi. Mr. Riaz Siddiqi is one of the founders of the Denham Capital Management LP. He is also the chair of the board of directors of the American Pakistan Foundation. Riaz, we're talking about the situation in Pakistan and of course how important Pakistan is, a pivotal player. But if we could, let's blow this, maybe that's the micro, let's go to the macro. and look at the whole geopolitical situation.
Right.
Some of the, what do you see? You're involved in private capital development and that type of thing in the private sector. As you deal with people around the world and you look at the changing situations, what are 3 or 4 of the major geopolitical changes that you see taking place, and how are we preparing to deal with these?
Well, great question. I think humanity is at a point of inflection in its history. And I'm talking about humanity as a whole. The changes that are taking place right now are of tectonic proportions. And the interesting thing is, as you know, as individuals, we live our daily lives according to to-do lists, right? We get up in the morning, we got 30 things to do, and at the end of the day, we congratulate ourselves, we got 10 done, and we add 10 more to it. And
That's right.
So we never really understand or take time to reflect on what's going on. Here's some of the things that are going on. And this is no particular order of importance, they're all important. You mentioned technology, but before I get to technology, I'll talk about one thing. Since the global financial crisis of 2008, the central banks of the world have intervened collectively to the tune of almost 2 times the GDP of the entire world. That's the amount of liquidity they have pumped into the system to keep it afloat, to keep us, you and me, feeling happy about ourselves, to keep our stock portfolios slightly up, etc. But at some point in time, there's a day of reckoning for these things. Mm-hmm. You know, if you're watching Bloomberg and CNBC, that there's a hefty discussion taking place right now in the US and globally as to how the world is going to adjust to a rising interest rate environment. Now, I'll give you a very simple statistic that anybody can wrap their minds around. You and I, Americans, we live in the US, our government takes in $3.5 trillion. And these are estimates, these are rounded estimates, okay. The budget that was just recently submitted was $4.4 trillion. Okay, the expectation is that we will grow ourselves to a balanced budget. So that if that happens, and let's hope and pray it happens, it'll take a period of time. Our accumulated deficit right now is bordering on $20 trillion, just between us friends. Every 200 basis points increase in interest rates would almost result in additional interest expense of $400 billion to $600 billion in that on that accumulated deficit. Now imagine the sacrifices the reallocations this society, we're just talking about one society in the world, would have to make if interest rates started rising, and which they will, right? Interest rates never stay low forever. The median 10-year treasury over the last 40 years is about 8.5%. Today the 10-year treasury is 2.8%. So where is it going? It's only going up, particularly now that there's this euphoria about a global growth story. You must be, quite familiar with that. Well, global growth typically is associated with rising inflation, typically is associated with rising interest rates and all that. Anyway, that's one major change risk that we have to. Then there's the geopolitical tensions between, I would say, 3 very major players on the geopolitical stage. That's us in the United States, that's China, which by all accounts in 2014 on a purchase power parity basis surpassed us as the biggest economy in the world, and on a notional basis, a $12 trillion economy growing at about 6-7%, and ours is an $18 trillion growing about 2-3%. They're going to cross us even in notional terms very soon. So that there's 2 of them, and then of course Russia. So there's 3 major players on the international stage, and the result of their interactions amongst themselves are going to affect not only the 3 of them, but also the rest of the world. So that's a major one. Then the third one is what you mentioned, technology. The rate of change of technology is not just technology is accelerating, but the rate of change of technology is accelerating to exponential proportions, and it will have vast implications. For instance, one thing that you'll hear Bill Gates talk about quite a bit, and Elon Musk and other large visionaries who have benefited from technology associations, they talk about income inequality. I mean, right now you'll see the concentration of wealth, because production of wealth is more cerebral than it is, through the use of hands. So there's a lot, fewer and fewer people that own more and more of the world's wealth. But at some point in time, that's a public policy question, right? Because if you don't take care of the dispossessed, the results, as you can see here in the US elections, the dispossessed spoke. And the dispossessed will speak globally if we don't take care of that. I mean, these are just a few of the things that keep me up at night,
Lying awake worrying about these, and you should be. We should all be worrying about them. It's very true. This income inequality is just soaring.
Oh.
It is soaring, especially in the United States. For years and years it wasn't, but over the past several years, that's certainly not been the case. How do you perceive other areas, and I know we're about to run out of time, but how do you look at artificial intelligence?
Artificial intelligence. So there's a raging debate right now. Raging debate is that are we letting out a genie that at some point in time will take control over the master? That's the most simplest way that I can explain the debate. And my own view on that is there is an inevitability to technology development. Meaning the technology, the genie is let out of the bottle when you craft the terminology that explains it. Because the minute you talk about AI, guess what? There are 1,000, if not 1,000,000 minds around the world that start working on it. Okay, so you and I may have a consensus that it is bad in general for humanity. Even if that were the case, you can't take 1,000,000 people and bottle them up again, right? I mean, where have we been able to do that? Look, when you talk about risks, think about this. The destructive power of a single human, has never been greater in human history. And what is that due to? It's due to technology, right? But the same technology, let's call it nuclear technology, has produced immense benefits. As you know, in medical treatment, it has, and imaging, and it has produced immense benefits. But there's the other side of it. And that's the case with AI. There is an other side to it. And I hope that really this calls for more institutions like the United Nations. Because one of the things we should talk about is bilateral discussions are fine, but multilateral institutions are extraordinarily important in the time that we're in. Because we're either going to rise and float together, or we're going to sink separately. But it can't be that this is considered to be a zero-sum game. One country develops AI and says, I'll use it to my benefit and to the detriment of the rest of the world. It just won't happen. The way it's going to happen is that either we'll use it to all of our benefits, or it will be a negative influence and factor and cause a lot of destruction globally. And one of those, is the fact that there'll be enormous job losses if we don't have policy prescriptions proactively, not after the fact, not after the horse has left the barn, but proactively think about what to do with the folks that are going to be displaced. If we don't do that, then it will be a disaster, in my humble opinion.
And you're absolutely right. We are living in an interdependent world. There's no one nation, no one region that can deal with climate change. No one region can deal with Ebola by itself. We're in this together.
Right.
And especially when you let the genie out of the bottle with artificial intelligence, which is it has the potential of displacing tens of millions of people.
Indeed.
Now, new jobs may be created, but the question is, will more be lost than be created? And that's going to be the challenge. But Mr. Riaz Siddiqi, we've only had a chance to scratch the surface or check the top of the iceberg. But again, this has been a fascinating discussion, and I want to thank you so very much for a very interesting
Thank you very much.
very
It's been my
informative
pleasure.
program. Thank you.
My pleasure.
I'm Bill Miller. Thank you for joining us today on Global Connections Television.